Welcome everyone, my name is Carrie McLaughlin. I'm here to speak to you about an informal assessment strategy known as the background knowledge probe. Let's first begin by talking about classroom assessment techniques. Angelo and Cross state that classroom assessment techniques are simple tools for collecting data on student learning in order to improve it. They go on to describe classroom assessment techniques as feedback devices used by instructors to find out how much, how well, and even how students are learning about what they're trying to teach them. Classroom assessment techniques are informal strategies that do not replace traditional forms of classroom evaluation. Instead, they provide teachers and learners information on learning. They're used to supplement as well as complement the formal evaluation strategies that we use. The assessment techniques are short assessments and they focus on a small amount of content. Instructors may be able to provide immediate feedback to the students. It all depends on the type of the assessment technique that they choose to use, or they may need to take the information the students have provided, summarize it, and then prepare the results for the students for a later time. I chose the background knowledge probe as my classroom assessment technique because the classroom courses we deliver require learners to complete an e-learning course that introduces the topic prior to them coming to class. The e-learning course will cover off keywords and definitions, basic principles about the topic. It will also cover things such as processes and procedures, as well as tools and resources that the student will need during the class. The background knowledge probe will enable me to identify where I need to begin the learning. Do I need to spend more time recapping the content that the students would have learned in the e-learning course, or can I jump right into the lesson? Another reason I chose this technique is because our learners often have diverse backgrounds. Some people are brand new to business, while others have extensive experience. The background knowledge probe will provide me with information to gauge the level of experience of the learners, as well as identify how much of a learning or experience range that I have in the class. Let's use an example. If 75% of the class is at one particular level and 25% is at another, well, I'll need to assess where I'll start the lesson. If I start the lesson based on the level of the 75% of the class, then I also need to think about how I'm going to address the learning needs of those other 25%. So a very great technique to help me sort this out. So we'll spend some time talking a bit about what the background knowledge probe is. The background knowledge probe are short, simple questionnaires that are created by an instructor for use at the beginning of a course. They may start a new unit or lesson, or may be used prior to introducing a new topic. They may require students to write short answers or multiple choice questions, or maybe a combination of both. I think of this assessment as a mini quiz, but it's not a quiz for grading purposes. It's simply a quiz to identify what the learner already knows. And it also helps to determine the point at which the instructor should begin the lesson. This assessment technique can be used before the lesson begins to assess a student's knowledge level and after the lesson ends to see how much the student has learned and if there's still any remaining gaps in knowledge. It is critical that the students understand what the assessment is for and how it will be used to guide and influence how the class proceeds. The questions should focus on specific information or concepts that the student will need to know to succeed in subsequent assignments. For example, I will be instructing a course on wage and income loss. Students will learn in class about analyzing wage and income documentation. In their e-learning course, they will have learned about the different types of wage and income loss documentation and when we use them. My background knowledge probe questions will focus on what they should have learned or should already know about wage and income loss documentation. It will also ask questions on what the students will be learning in class. When writing the questions, instructors should ensure that at least one question will be answered correctly by the student. This may be a question directly related to the material that they had just learned. For example, I may ask students to identify 5 types of wage and income loss documents. Another guiding principle is to create a question that is a bit more challenging for students. For example, I will ask students to assess their comfort levels using the wage and income loss documentation in claim settling. The classroom will focus on analysis of the documentation application in a claims context. So I'll ask questions around these competencies to assess the level of knowledge and experience the students have going into the topic. So what do we do with the information that we've gathered? So once students have completed the background knowledge probe, whether in the form of a questionnaire or a pre-assessment, they will turn it in to the instructor, and the instructor will review the information and summarize the responses. Depending on the type of tool used, the instructor will decide the best way to provide the feedback to the students. This can be done in a number of methods. Terry Morris created a summary of using a background knowledge probe for online learning. The concepts are identical whether used in an online course or a classroom setting. I like the diagram he uses here to depict feedback. If it's a simple questionnaire, the instructor may want to read the responses out to the class. An instructor may also choose to email students with the responses. This may be in the form of the answers the instructors were seeking, or as a general overview of key points the assessment was targeting. The instructor may also consider letting the entire class know if there was a common theme that was surfacing from the assessment, so the learners can judge themselves against others within the class so that they can gauge where their knowledge level is going into the program. Once the instructor has provided the feedback, the students, he or she will let the students know how the feedback will influence how the course will proceed. So let's talk a little bit now about the pros and the cons of using this classroom assessment technique. So background knowledge probes can provide useful data not only about students' knowledge of the topic, but also their skills in communicating what they know. They help to provide baseline data so that instructors can make decisions on where they'll begin their course. By building on background knowledge the students do have, the instructor can give students a familiar starting point. It also encourages students to connect the lessons from their past experiences and prior knowledge. This provides a connection between old and new knowledge and helps the students grow further. Some of the cons associated with using this assessment technique are the fact that the students' responses may be at odds with what the instructor was expecting. This can overwhelm the instructor and even demoralize the individual. Students who are underprepared may have difficulty responding to the probe and then just become frustrated with the learning. In the process of reading and classifying responses, an instructor may form hard to change first impressions, which can affect his or her expectation of the students for the remainder of the class. So in summary, the background knowledge probes are beneficial for both instructors and learners. They help instructors determine the most effective starting point for a given lesson and the most appropriate level at which the instruction should begin. They provide learners with an assessment of their own knowledge of the topic and expectation of the learning they have ahead of them. When used appropriately, they can be very effective tools before, during, and post-learning.